はい、皆さん、こんにちは。トラフォティンのです。さあ、今回はですね、マイクロソフト、Activision Blizzard を買収。Microsoft has been dragged to court because they decided to buy out the beloved video game giant, Activision Blizzard. Everyone's gathered around to see what the outcome will be. So why not pile in on the crystal ball peering? Because I'm going to make the prediction that the buyout of Activision Blizzard holds dire consequences to the understanding of Microsoft's monopoly way off into the future, and it's going to harm everyone, and no, not just the gamers. Activision Blizzard is one of the largest video game companies in the world, and the maker of some of the most popular video games in the world, like Call of Duty, Candy Crush, and Diablo. But nothing has been going good for Activision. Reviews for their recent games have been very middling, and there have been accounts that have emerged from inside the company of a culture of harassment partially powered by the senior leadership team. Enter White Knight Microsoft. January 18th, 2022, Microsoft announced that they would purchase Activision Blizzard for $69 billion. Nice. Even more fascinating is the reactions from gamers and famous streamers have all been glowing with the idea that Xbox is going to be getting more games. Of course, Microsoft's Xbox division has been busy securing various deals and promises of exclusivity with companies like Nvidia and Boosteroid and various other game studios. But we need to ask ourselves, why is Microsoft willing to spend seemingly bottomless sums of money to acquire video game companies? The answer is Microsoft has been a far distant third in console gaming, far behind Sony and Nintendo, and is even more disconnected from the coveted revenue source of mobile gaming. And from anyone on the outside looking in, acquiring Activision Blizzard would instantly give Microsoft a large portfolio of established brands and further their goal of boosting the Xbox platform and give them a pathway into mobile gaming, which they don't have at all. And if you thought that gamers capitulating to Microsoft's decision was crazy, many other countries have allowed the merger, except for two. The biggest resistance comes from the United Kingdom's Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, and the United States' Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. Over the last week, the FTC has held a private court case, which has surfaced a treasure trove of documents, emails, and corporate posturing, exposing the truth behind the whole debacle, some of which Sony didn't even redact properly with a permanent marker. Sony, the creator of PlayStation and the biggest critic of the acquisition, has loudly protested the fear that Microsoft will sabotage the PlayStation versions of their titles that are made on PlayStation, despite Microsoft promising a decade-long non-exclusivity agreement. Of course, the news stops right here, and this is where the palm reading and dream interpretations start. We're still waiting on that decision by the time I am recording this, and by the time you might see this, the US courts may have already made their decision. But what these US courts won't see is the long-lasting consequences, if they even understood what they were presiding over to begin with. And I want to sort of break this down into a couple predictions of what I think is going to happen and what this points to the future of Microsoft. And let's start with the first one. Let's face it, I don't know the outcome of this trial, but I'm going to say it right now. Microsoft is going to get what they want. Too many public people, whether it be online, in forums, or even large media personalities and governments, are in favor of this. Microsoft's purchase will go through. The only thing that we can hope for is that this court case is going to be used to create some regulation against the harms and fears both Microsoft and Sony levy against each other. Microsoft hates the concept of exclusivity because Sony has been milking it as a tactic for years to keep them out of the games industry. And Sony hates the prospect of Microsoft taking away games from the walled garden they created. But how do we solve this particular problem, of course, with all this exclusivity? It's easy. We ban contractual exclusivity and self-sabotage of non-exclusive products in gaming. This alleviates the fear from both sides that it's essentially political posturing over the PlayStation and Xbox exclusives. In fact, it's clear that Microsoft doesn't even care because they wouldn't have offered non-exclusivity as an option if they really cared about exclusivity. And in a way, this exclusivity is going to be a selling point for Microsoft to subtly push some of their other points. But of course, you have to think about the gamers. The other thing this court case highlights is how ill-prepared federal courts and the US government were to dealing with this whole debacle. The Biden administration here in the United States have vowed for a crackdown on big tech. And in the current laws, as they are, pay attention here, Microsoft knows they will win.
We lost the worst generation to lose in the Xbox One generation, where everybody built their digital library of games.
And in a paywall, it's a Wall Street Journal article, the lawyer guard dog, Brad Smith, comes out of his doghouse to say, well, acquiring Activision Blizzard would enable Microsoft to compete against Sony, Apple, and Google through innovation that would benefit consumers. While modern consumers can stream video or music on multiple devices on low-cost subscription plans, many games can often only be individually purchased and downloaded on one device. Microsoft wants to change that by offering consumers the option to subscribe to a cloud gaming service that lets them stream a variety of games on multiple platforms for one reasonable fee. This would benefit developers by allowing them to reach a much broader audience. And news has emerged that one of the directors from the UK CMA used to be a Sony lawyer, which no doubt helps Microsoft sell their narrative to governments, but it's really just icing on the cake, which is why they don't put a lot of focus on it. Because this entire situation showcases that Activision is going to be the showcase of Microsoft's new monopoly strategy. Because here's what we need to analyze. In the gaming space, Microsoft may lag incredibly far behind its competitors, but that doesn't mean that they're far behind in others. The greater concern is what this means for the other non-gaming industries that Microsoft has real market share in. Let's take the cloud and computing space, for example. While Amazon dominates the cloud computing space, Google and Microsoft have been fighting tooth and nail for the silver medal. While both Google and Microsoft have been ramping up their AI spaces, this is where Microsoft hopes to get the most benefit out of Activision by using Activision to expand their cloud offering. Which is why when you read accounts of the trials, you'll see that Sony is very afraid of Microsoft's cloud platform. Because keep in mind, Sony has a game streaming service, but that game streaming service is partially owned and created by Microsoft. In review of Microsoft's cloud revenue service, Microsoft makes $34 billion in cloud revenue every year, and with some generous estimations, this beats out Google's $26 billion in cloud revenue, which is still a far distant foe from Amazon, but still more than their most immediate competitor. And we look at the pattern of behavior that surrounds both Microsoft and Google. We look at Google basically self-sabotaging themselves while Microsoft continues to rise to the top. And we can see this when we analyze things like the way AI is treated in cloud computing and how pushy both Microsoft and Google have been about AI. But wouldn't your position be more promising if you were the one buying out companies like OpenAI versus someone who rushed out some silly in-house product which got things wrong in promotional material? And this follows another pattern of behavior from Microsoft. It's being content with being number two. While your larger rivals eat each other out, they tank all of the regulation and any of the fallout in the process while you keep to yourself. And Microsoft may have come to view this position as their dominant strategy to succeed as being a distant third between Sony and Nintendo while they fight each other and they stay out of the way. And of course, nothing's to stop Microsoft once they've amassed a large enough cloud offering, AI market, and gaming community, right? The one thing that I feel like we need to also talk about is what's going to change from the buyout of Activision with game developers. And now I'm pretty sure some of you are going to ask, what's even going to change at all? I don't think them buying out Activision is going to change anything. But I think this is actually going to substantiate a large reality that I'm pretty sure most game developers are aware of, and it's that most game developers use Windows, a Microsoft-owned platform that dominates a large portion of desktop and developer market share. No sane person is going to use macOS, God help you Linux, for game development. But subject to this dichotomy isn't just indie game developers or medium-sized game developers, it's going to be companies like Sony, whose developers no doubt are going to be using Windows and porting their games to Windows once their own exclusivity contracts end. PC gaming is also the dark horse of this entire trial, and while it is relegated to a small vocal minority, it's largely a Microsoft-controlled platform which allows Microsoft to boost the amount of influence they have over the world. We know that Microsoft and Google constantly fight the enterprise world, and the Activision deal would only benefit Microsoft because it would get more people to use their products in a well-established brand which has multiple smaller brands in various facets of the gaming industry and in developer communities. And Microsoft has promised that these games and platforms will be available to outsiders and for Sony for years to come. But all you need to do is ask yourself this one question. What happens 10 years from now in 2034 when all of these deals are up? And this is probably the biggest stretch, but let's consider this. The CEOs of Xbox, or the equivalent titles like Robert Bach and Don Matrick, for example, because Microsoft has changed the title multiple times, have never lasted very long. If Phil Spencer's successor comes along, what if they don't share the same views? Or if Microsoft changes as a company within the next 10 years and takes a very different position? Then you really will have to deal with your games being taken away unless meaningful regulation is passed to block it. Inevitably, someone else is going to bring up the embrace, extend, extinguish that came out of the documents of Microsoft's antitrusts of the early 2000s, but I feel like this fails to capture Microsoft's content to be second strategy. Now, I understand for old-timers that this might be a concern, but I would say this is way off into the future, and I would be more concerned about Microsoft's current strategy. Being second place is going to become the going practice for the rest of big tech. If we go by the, let's say, the insurtification of platforms is anything to go by, these platforms making themselves worse is done in a way to make themselves appear smaller so that they will go under the scrutiny of government regulation. And this is probably the biggest part of this monopoly strategy. That's it from me, because there's nothing we can do except sit back and watch as Microsoft destroys the world as we know it. So why don't you go leave a like on this video? Leave a like on this video if you can't wait to see the awesome new monopoly practices of Microsoft. And leave a comment down below about what you think Microsoft is going to do to ruin our future. Thank you for watching. I am going to go home, crawl into a corner, and cry myself to sleep.